Assalamu alaikum students, welcome to the lecture number 6, Communication Skills ENGL 1119. We will cover the remaining portion of the cover letter and some of the important considerations which are still missing in our completion for the cover letter. So we have already completed certain key elements of a cover letter, for example, the details which you should mention, the contents, the wording, these all things have already been covered. Now, there are certain other things which we should also consider while preparing our cover letter. So, in this regard, it is also very important that if you are preparing a hard copy of your job application, then the selection of a paper and the printing quality also plays an important role. Similarly, you also have to look for the errors, because you have to make sure that your text is error free, because if there are grammatical errors, if there are spelling errors, if there are punctuation errors, this could really lead to being disqualification, in the sense that the person who will be reading your cover letter may consider you quite inappropriate, quite lazy, and in this regard you may lose the chance of getting shortlisted. Similarly, the layout and the design of the overall design of your cover letter is also very important. If you are printing in color, then the color scheme should be appropriate, and similarly you should not overdo it. The tone, it's very important that what kind of wording you're using. Are you begging, are you pleading, or you are expressing the details? Your tone should be neutral, it should not be aggressive. So the wording, the choice of the wording is very important, and the tone you set inside your cover letter is very important. Also, you have to make sure that you are not using some negative sentences like, oh, I lost this, I did this, because you have to talk about the positive stuff that has happened in your life and which you should mention in your cover letter. Similarly, styling is very important. Content. So we should now cover one by one these items. It is very important that you should only use A4 size paper. Of course, there are also legal size paper in Pakistan which are also quite readily available. But while you are printing a CV, similarly, because most of the time you are printing your CV on A4 size papers. Similarly, the cover letter should also be on the A4 size paper. Select a white paper, a good quality paper. So I would recommend that go for an 80-gram paper. It should be white. Don't buy cheap paper. Don't buy a kind of a paper which is extra glossy or something like that. You have to make sure that you are not, neither you must overdo it, nor you must lack a certain standard. So A4 size good quality white paper is the bare minimum. When you're writing the cover letter, don't think about saving the paper or saving the space. You should not write on both sides. You should not print actually on both sides of the paper. Instead, choose only the one side of the paper while you're printing. Very important thing. For example, it is very important that sometimes the people are choosing good quality paper for their curriculum vitae, CV, and then they're using the normal paper for the cover letter. So make sure that the quality of the paper is similar for both your resume and your cover letter. It is very important that your resume and the cover letter both have the same quality of the papers. So use the same quality paper and even if possible, you should use the same printer. So most of the time it is quite possible that you already have a resume, but because you have to tailor made your cover letter, so that's why perhaps you will print it at the end. So the printing quality should also be quite similar on both these documents. So it must not appear that you have prepared one item quite earlier and the second item was prepared quite late. One of the very important things on all of your such documents is that you have to make sure that the printer is printing the pages correctly. There are no shadowing, no dirty marks, like there should be no oil prints or fingerprints, and the paper should not be wrinkled. It should be wrinkle free paper, and you should not bend it. Also, avoid stapling the paper at this step. So your pages which you are using, they should not have some kind of a physical damage. Similarly, it is quite possible that there could be dark ink remaining from the printing. So you also have to make sure that there are no such dark shadows, there are no such remaining ink from your printer. So the paper should be as clean as possible. Most of the time when people have written a cover letter, they become lazy and they don't want to reread it. You have to read it again and again before submitting it, because it is quite possible that you may have made serious mistakes. Similarly, you also have to follow the employment advertisement, the recruitment directions, because you cannot avoid these details. It is quite possible that you just have looked at the main heading of the job advertisement and you overlooked some of the minor details, and perhaps it is quite possible that you were not even eligible because the job details has some further additional requirements which you do not possess, and you either purposefully or or unintentionally you have just omitted those details, or you just did not follow those details. So it is quite possible you have done this. In these kind of scenarios, this is the most negative effect you can create, because you were not eligible to apply for and you have still done that. So it is really not a positive sign in your cover letters. Similarly, sometimes there are certain other recruitment directions, certain other instructions, and for example, like you may possess certain qualifications which were the requirement of the job, but you failed to mention them in your cover letter. So you have to avoid these kind of things. So your cover letter actually is in addition to your resume, and your cover letter is actually presenting what was asked in the job advertisement. So you have to make sure that the details mentioned in the job advertisement actually are being covered by your cover letter. Proofread, very important. Do it again and again. It is very common that once you have prepared the letter and then psychologically you are just thinking that you have done the best of the best, so you try to overlook it. Maybe you are tired or whatever the reason. Perhaps wait for some time and read it again, because you have to proofread it again and again. There are always chances for spelling mistakes, for formatting errors, for styling errors, for simple punctuation errors, so you have to proofread it again and again. Once you have written a cover letter, before submitting, before printing, make sure to read the recipient's name once again. Make sure, if even if you didn't know the recipient's name, you still know the designation, salutation. So these kind of things you should read it, because it is quite possible that you may have made a mistake. Because also it is quite possible that sometimes, a similar kind of jobs in two different companies, and you already have prepared one such cover letter, and now you just have to send it to the next company. And because of, because you already have this same cover letter, because it is also a possibility, and in this scenario you chose to not read the company's name, and imagine what impression it provides. So you were supposed to send this cover letter to the company A, but on the cover letter, because you already have written it, you have mentioned the name of the company B. This is very wrong, and this but believe me, this happens a lot. This happens a lot of the time, because it is quite possible you have made once such a great letter, and now because you may have changed the name of the company within the body of the letter, but you forgot to change it in the start. Similarly, it is also possible you may change the name of the company in the start, but afterwards, in the main body, you may have forgotten to correct it. Similarly, the salutation, the titles, they should be correctly spelled. There should be no error. There could be no error at all. You have to make sure that these things are error-free. After you have done all that, ask someone from your friends circle, ask someone from your family to proofread your cover letter and resume, because it is possible that once you are reading it again and again, you yourself are not aware of any more mistakes. So have another perspective, have somebody else idea on these documents. So show them to a friend, show them to a colleague, show them to somebody senior, who has more experience. So perhaps they could point out some of the mistakes. Even you should always be grateful that you may have detected some mistakes before sending them. So this is very important, that just don't only read it and read it yourself, but also ask someone else to proofread it for you. This is very common that people tend to add make believe stuff. They tend to add factually incorrect information. Do not lie in your cover letter. It is very similar to your resume, in a sense that, like in the resume, you should never lie. Similarly, in the cover letter, you should never lie. There should be no factual errors. You should never mention something which was not happened. You should never mention any such certification which you never got, or like a training experience or anything which never happened. You should never mention it. So factually, it should be correct. You should not use make believe stuff. You should not lie in your cover letter. So most of the time, people tend to ignore and they don't add their signatures in the cover letters, because if your cover letter has been written by you and it is factually correct, you should add your signature. So you should sign your cover letter, and while signing your cover letter, make sure that you sign your cover letter in blue. If the blue pen is not available, only then choose for the black one. But you cannot choose any other color to sign your cover letter. It is not common in Pakistan right now, but in many Western countries, it is quite common that they also demand that you sign your resume, because most of the time, the company is not asking initially for your educational certificates and documents, so they believe what you have mentioned in your resume is correct. That's why they are also asking you, demanding you that you should sign your resume. So in fact, in Pakistan, there is no such requirement. So it's up to you whether you want to sign your resume or not. But the cover letter, it is universally. The cover letter has to be signed. You have to make sure that you have signed your cover letter, and when you are signing your cover letter, preferably sign in blue. Do not sign in other. Do not sign while using other inks, black or something like that. Black is only acceptable in case you don't have the blue. But when you have signed with blue ink, so it ensures that you only have done it personally and it was not photocopying. So it really gives good impression. Very important thing, even this should also be similar to what you do with your job application forms. For example, once you have prepared a resume, once you have prepared a cover letter, make sure to keep the copies of such documents with you, because it is quite possible that you are invited for an interview at a much later stage, and perhaps you have forgotten the details which you have mentioned in your cover letter, and so it is very negative that you have forgotten. Perhaps there was some minor detail you had added in your resume or your cover letter, but now you have forgotten this minor detail. So make sure that you keep the copy of your cover letter and the resume which you plan to submit for this particular job to a particular organization. So also I would say you should make sure that if it's a public sector organization and you have submitted a job application form, because like in Pakistan it is quite common that once you are submitting a job application form to a public sector organization, they ask you for a long form. This form should be filled, so keep the copy of this form as well, because it is quite possible that this form has some certain other entries which you may forget at a later stage. So that's why it is very important that you have this information, and before going to the interview you could read it again, and then you will know that what you already have mentioned in your cover letter, and you could defend it easily. So it will be much easier for you to defend such contents. So for a private organization, like especially if such organization, somebody referred you for this job and they asked you to send their job, send your documents. So it is also a good idea to follow your application, with the email. So if for example the HR manager has, it is also possible, not for the entry level jobs but for more advanced jobs, it is possible that the HR manager invites you to submit a job application for a particular job. In this case, make sure that if you have not heard from them in a week, write them an email. But for especially for the public, for in Pakistan, for example, like the public sector organizations, they tend not to inform most of the time the applicants. Therefore you have to make sure that you are visiting their website, and perhaps you're also in touch with other applicants. So in this way you will know that if the shortlisting has been started, or if the recruitment process is continuously going on or not. So you have to be very alert in case of public sector organizations. But for private organizations, there is no harm in contacting them regarding your application, regarding your email, so regarding your job application. So you could always choose to contact them via telephone or email after, I would say, after 2 weeks. Very nice idea. So after the deadline of, the if there was a submission deadline, so contact them after this deadline and ask them that if you so what is the status of your job application, so what happened to the processing, further processing of your job application. In this way, if the information is already out, you should know it. You should follow a standard cover letter format. Don't do some special, like you should not follow some kind of a unique style. Maybe you are browsing on internet and then like you Google it and you found something very nice. It may have appeared very nice to you, very unique, but stick to the normal, stick to the standard, because you have to be very safe, because the cover letter, of course, the content should be genuine, but with the overall style, with the overall formatting, it should not be unique. It should follow the standard things which we have already discussed in our last lectures. Very important thing, because for most of the entry level positions, when you are at the start of your careers, because you don't have many experiences, many work related experiences, so it is very important that you keep your cover letter to one page, because so you may have to write it, you may have to like to evaluate it again and again to make sure that your cover letter does not exceed more than one page. So when you are more experienced, when you have more such details to discuss, perhaps for not for the entry level job, but for the mid level job, mid career jobs, for such jobs, it is of course possible to submit a cover letter which is more than one page. But for entry level jobs, for a job which you will be looking after the completion of your studies, you should not write a long cover letter exceeding more than one page. Also, you have to make sure that you set the margins at a standard size. So for example, the margin on the page, how long your text is within one page. So this is actually controlled by the margins. So when you're using a word editor to write your cover letter, make sure that you have set the margins at 1.5 inch, 1.5 inch. So this standard should be used when you have set the margin. Normally, these are also by default these settings, but of course you have to check it. You have to make sure that your margins at 1.5 inch, because it always helps. For example, when you are submitting the cover letter in a hard copy, the organization may choose to punch it, and then insert it in a folder, in a file cover. So in that scenario, while your margins are 1.5 inch, it will make sure that none of your content, none of your text is missing, none of your text is lost due to the punching holes. So make sure that the margins are set at 1.5 inch. Very important that you have to use a very simple, easy to read font style. So the font style, for example, I would recommend stick with the 12 font size and Times New Roman. This should be your standard, but of course you could also opt for either Courier or Helvetica, but do not use any other unique font style. So make sure, like Arial is also okay. I have not mentioned it here, but Arial is also okay. So your font style should be pretty much standard. You should not use some unique font style, and the font size, it could be between 10 and 14, but I would certainly recommend that stick with the standard font size of 12. So of course you could also use underlining, bold facing, italics, all caps. In word editor you have such options to make your document look more attractive. For example, if there was certain achievement, you may decide to bold this achievement, you may decide to highlight this achievement, you may decide to underline this achievement, so it is acceptable. You can do this, of course, in your cover letter, but make sure you are not overdoing it. If you are overdoing this is a big problem. So because, for example, like if there are certain only few underlines, of course the person who is reading this cover letter will go to these underlined highlighted portions more quickly, and it will be much easier for such information to be grasped. But if you have overdone it, if you were doing it like randomly, then it could be a big problem for the person who is evaluating your cover letter. At the start of the cover letters lecture series, I clearly mentioned that the resume could be a unique, but your cover letter, it has to be for one specific position. You cannot write the cover letters for different, for example, you have just prepared one cover letter and you are sending it to different organizations for different jobs. No, of course not. Every job is unique job. So it is also possible, for example, if you are working for some organization, and or if you want to apply for a certain organization, and there are two such organizations which have opened, like which have announced a job opening. Both these openings are quite similar. Then in that scenario, you will have one kind of a cover letter, but still, the address will be different, the company details will be different. So you have to still tailor your cover letter. So with your resume, you don't have to tailor it. A resume could be sent to number of different, same resume could be sent to number of different prospective employers, but your cover letter, it has to be tailor made. You have to modify it. You have to rewrite certain paragraphs. You may have to add or omit certain details from your cover letter, so that it could be more job specific, so that it can cover more of that information which was demanded in the job application. Also, it is very important that it must give a clear picture, and for example, because you're marketing yourself, and this is for the prospective employer to judge your personality, to know more about you. That's why you have to make sure that your every cover letter is a tailor-made cover letter. One other important thing, of course, for example, you should, so industry jargon means, for example, like there are industry specific terminology. So make sure that you are using the industry specific terminology related to your career. For example, if you are using, for example, if you are using biological or medicine and some terms, then this is not good, because you should not use medical terms while you're writing a job application for civil engineering, for agriculture engineering, or for chemical engineering. So you have to make sure that you are using the terminology which is synonymous to your particular career. You should not use such terminology which is not synonymous to your career. Very important, when you're reading the job advertisement, when you're reading this email in which the job require, the details regarding the prospective employee are available. So you have to identify the keywords, the keywords. For example, there could be some certain specific softwares, certain specific certifications, certain specific traits, certain specific experiences, a company may demand such kind of things. So you have to identify these keywords, and don't be shy to use these keywords in your cover letter. So identify those keywords already mentioned by the prospective employer and adopt them, use them in your own cover letter. Make sure that you are making all positive statements. So do not make negative statements. Even there was certain, so avoid altogether. You have to avoid using negative aspects. Your tone should be very positive. So make positive statements. Do not make negative or exclamatory statements, or statements which indicate certain political inclination, certain racial inclination, certain religious inclination. So avoid using such kind of statements. Make positive statements. Very important that you have to make sure that your each sentence leaves a positive impression. Make sure your sentences are creating a positive impression. Make sure your sentences are in such a way that they are being related to you in a positive manner. Do not use negative sentences. Do not use aggressive tone. Do not use pleading tone. Do not use begging tone. Don't talk about your personal difficulties, that you may have been jobless for ages. No, you cannot mention such kind of negative details in your cover letter. So your tone has to be very positive, that it creates a very positive, optimistic picture about you. So you have to present yourself in a very nice manner, in a very gentleman manner. So make sure that this tone is positive. Of course, this is very important that the wording of your cover letter should be very much original, but you don't have to be use cuteness. Like it is not a storybook, or you are not writing something about there is no make believe stuff in your cover letter. When you have presented all the details in your cover letter factually correct, so make sure the context, make sure the words you have used is also original, but you cannot use such fancy words. Perhaps the fancy words which are good to hear, but for example, it won't leave a good impression, because even if you simply don't know their meaning as well. So stick to the industrial related, stick to the terminology which is actually typically related with your career, with your specific field, and also be original, but you don't have to use such fancy difficult words which you also don't understand. We will talk about the action verbs and phrases in our next lecture. But for now, what you really have to understand, that the action verbs and phrases, for example, these are certain type of words which actually is providing a very clear objective, very clear image. So when somebody is using these kind of words, so for example, like you say calculate, you say avoid, so you different, certain specific action verbs and phrases, you could always use them. So we will cover this aspect in our next lecture, and you will see how we can use these action verbs and phrases. But for the time being, you must know that you have to use these action verbs and phrases in your cover letter. I have already mentioned this in today, that you should show determination, you should be optimistic, you should not be, you should not show this desperation, that, oh, you are so pessimistic. No, of course not. That you have been jobless for ages. No, no, you don't have to show these kind of details. So you have to choose the words, which show your determination, which show your sheer willpower, which show that you are a fighter, which show that you are a very reliable person. But you don't plead, you don't beg, you don't show this desperation, you don't show this frustration. Perhaps, the life has been very hard, the life has been very unfair to you, but you cannot add such personal details, you cannot add such personal misfortunes in your cover letter. You have to avoid them altogether. Make sure you are mentioning the determination, the sheer determination should be there, but the rest you can omit. So, for example, when you have written your cover letter, you may have, while proofreading, you may have to adjust them. Perhaps it is quite possible that between second and third paragraphs, you may have to shift some of the words. So, you have to organize the context. For example, once you are mentioning stuff about your studies, so, don't start now again, then your job experience, and then come back to your educational experiences. No, so you have to organize the context, that okay, talk about your educational experiences, talk about your academics, talk about your certifications, talk about your softwares, talk about your jobs, then habits, and then, so you have to organize the context. You have to make sure that these all of this context can easily be identified within your cover letter. They should not overlap. You have to make sure that you are not repeating them again and again. So it is very important that it should be organized in a reasonable manner, in a logical order. So do not mention your habits, your personal attributes in the beginning of the cover letter. So there is a certain logical, reasonable order which we have already covered in our last lecture. So make sure that you follow, you stick to actually this logical and reasonable order. Use correct grammar, very important, very important. While you are proofreading yourself, while you may be using somebody else help. So make sure, whoever is proofreading your cover letter, you should make sure that you are using the correct grammar. Also, you have to make sure that you are using the correct punctuation. So it is also very important, besides grammar, that your punctuation is correct. For correct grammar, you can of course use the word editor's inbuilt help features. You can also download certain Grammarly is a very common software. For example, once you have installed it, it identifies the grammatical mistakes, it identifies the punctuation mistakes in your letter, in your wording, and it helps you to correct them. Also make sure that your sentences and paragraphs are short. Don't write the long sentences, don't overdo it. If you are writing the long sentences, it creates a very negative effect, because the long sentences sometimes, it is very easy for you to make errors, grammatical errors, punctuation errors, and of course, the tone could also become from neutral and positive to negative if your sentence is quite large. So you have to keep your sentences short. You have to keep your paragraphs short. Make sure that you are using short words. Make sure that you are using easy, simple language. Do not add the words which may be fancy and you have just found them in a dictionary, but don't use those words which are not commonly used in everyday life. Don't use some ancient words. Don't use some difficult fancy words. This is not your grammar test. This is not your vocabulary test. This is actually you are presenting yourself, so you have to be correct. Don't use certain also, you have to make sure, perhaps it is also quite possible that you are using certain English words in your daily life. Perhaps they are not English words. So, of course, also avoid such words. Similarly, avoid slang words. Slang words are not allowed to be used in your cover letter. So, it is quite possible that you are using them in a daily life, and of course, you are not aware of the meaning of these slang words. So make sure that you don't use these slang words in your cover letter. So, as I have already mentioned, that your cover letter should not be more than one page. So make sure that each word is been written in a manner that for example, because you cannot increase the text size. So this is very important. That you are not using extra words. Make sure that you come to the point directly, but you are not beating about the bush. You are not creating and making such huge stories. So don't beat about the bush. Make every word count. Why? Because you have this space restriction. You cannot prepare the cover letters, very long cover letters. So make sure the number of words you are choosing, the quality of these words, these should be organized, and you should not really elaborate certain things in your cover letter, in order to make sure that your cover letter is within a certain standard. Already mentioned that your punctuation should be appropriate. So don't be afraid of using commas, dashes, periods, semicolons, colons. So you should not be afraid of them, but these should be appropriate. So while you are proofreading your cover letter, or somebody else is proofreading it for you, make sure they give proper attention to this punctuation, because incorrect punctuation is really very harmful. And for example, like incorrect punctuation, in addition to bad grammar or spelling mistakes, clearly depicts that this job applicant is very irresponsible, is very lazy, and he is actually not interested in the job. This has already been discussed time and again in previous lectures, that you have to address the employer's needs, because you are marketing yourself for this job. And after you have read in newspaper or any other advertisement, for example, once you are applying for a certain job, then you have to focus on the employer's needs. You cannot focus on your personal needs. For example, of course you do need a job, you do need a good job, but you have to focus the needs of the employer. So you have to align the employer needs to your sentences. For example, your sentences should clearly mention that, okay, the employer has demanded certain qualities, certain attributes which you already possess. So that's why, for example, this letter should only be in a manner that your employer's needs are being fulfilled instead of your own, because if you get the job, of course your needs will be fulfilled. Very important, you have certain set of qualities, you have certain attributes, you have certain certifications. So make sure these skills, these qualities match the employer's needs. You have to make sure, you are writing such sentences which clearly show that the employer needs are aligned with your personal attributes, your skills, your qualifications, your academic excellence. So make sure you get the idea from the job advertisement, you get the idea from the employer needs, and then you put these employer needs in your letter, in your cover letter, and they are actually covering all those stuff. This is very important that you have to focus on what you can do for the employer. You have to show them that, of course, I can do this. For example, there was a certain job requirement. It states that there is in a multicultural environment you may have to work. So perhaps it is a good time to mention your multilingual skills. So you could mention that you have certain experiences living in different countries and living in different cultures. So, and then of course these experiences should be linked to the fact that you can achieve a harmony within your organization. Perhaps for a civil engineering, you could say that, of course, on a huge construction projects where a lot of multinational people are working, you can make sure that the discipline is maintained, and there will be no friction between the people from the different backgrounds. So similarly, you also have to make sure that you are providing information for the employer, that how you will contribute to the organization. You have to mention, because you will present your skills aligned with the needs of the organization to whom you are applying, and then you should mention that you will contribute in certain way that will help the organization, so that the organization could profit more, the organization could grow more. So you have to make sure that you are adding such details. It is very important that you should add certain facts about the organization to whom you are applying. So for example, these facts could be that the organization may have started a new manufacturing plant. The organization may have won a certain huge contract recently. So you have to add certain types of this information which reflects that you have researched the company. But make sure that you are not writing something word of the mouth. You should write the thing which is actually factually correct, and the source is correct. So you have to make sure, once you are writing something about the organization and about the company, it should be correct. So double check it. Don't write something straight away from somebody else you have heard. Don't use those things, but instead research on your own. Research about the company. Perhaps you are not aware of a huge new contract, or if even perhaps you are aware of certain other agreements being signed by your prospective employer and other organizations. So you could mention these kind of details. This will show that you have researched for your future organization, you have researched about this company, and it really gives a very positive impression about you. Very important that you should be very specific. Do not make general statements. So the general statements could be certainly, like what you actually hear in your daily life. Don't make those general statements. You have to be very specific. As I have already said, that you cannot beat around the bush. Be specific. Avoid general statements. Avoid certain wording. Avoid certain such common, street language. Avoid certain sentences. Oh no, well, you must be. This organization is very rich. Or no, don't use such certain jargon. Don't use these kind of words, because you have to be very specific. You have to be factually correct, and you should avoid making general statements. So this was our lecture number 6. Please watch this video. Please go through the lecture slides already available on your LMS at ocw.kfueit.edu.pk. This video is available on your YouTube channel. So watch this lecture video, because once you join our live session on Tuesday, so you should have already seen this video, so that we can actually and actively participate in a healthy discussion about the contents covered in this video, so that we can actually use this online lecture time. Of course, this requires a certain extra effort from your side, but it will give you more time, of course, to prepare, and of course it will help us in a really meaningful discussion. The action verbs we will be covering in our next lecture. So we will talk about the action verbs in our next lecture. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me via my email asim.ali@kfueit.edu.pk. But the best thing to do is, you could always contact me during the lecture, and the when we will have the online lecture on Tuesday. So make sure that you are present in the online lecture, and you already know that during the online lecture you can only join the online lecture using your KFUEIT email. So thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.